been a rough week, hasn't it? I'm not sure if today's message is very, very timely or just coincidental. But it's All Saints' Day. It occurs every year, technically November 1st. But in the church, we most often celebrate it the first Sunday in November. Last year, I was in Guatemala on November 1st, hence the very colorful stole. All Saints' Day in Guatemala and in many Latin American countries is a national holiday. Everybody takes off work. Kids are out of school. It is called Dia de los Muertos. Dia de los Muertos. The Day of the Dead. It's a day when they celebrate their loved ones who have died. Kids make these huge kites. And I was fortunate I got to be a judge in a kite flying contest at Nueva Esperanza, which means New Hope. And the kids came up to the church, which was up on this big, huge hill. And the road wound way up, and it was up on a hill, and the kites were flying hundreds of feet in the air. And they had different age groups, and the kids had fun. They don't pay particularly attention to safety like we do here in the United States, so you had kids flying kites, standing up on a ledge about like this, with about a 30-foot drop. Mom and Dad watching them. But they were happy. They were happy. Families build altars in their homes in honor of the deceased. And extended families, they gather in cemeteries with elaborate picnic lunches to have meals in honor of their loved ones who passed away. It was a completely new perspective for me, honoring the dead with such celebrations of life. What will you leave behind? What will you be remembered for? What is your legacy of faith? Those are unpleasant and even uncomfortable thoughts for some of us, but for others, those thoughts bring comfort. Someday, we will all die. Those of us who call ourselves Christians or Christ followers, we believe that when we pass from this life, we transition to the next, where our inheritance is to spend eternity in the holy presence of the Almighty God. Again, for some, that thought brings great comfort. And for others, that thought brings great fear. In our scripture today, I don't quite understand it entirely. I mean, some of it I really struggle to get my brain around. But here's what I picture, okay, in Hebrews. And this chapter comes after what's known as the Hall of Fame of Faith, where they list the patriarchs and all the faithful fathers, if you will, of their faith. But here's what I picture. We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses as we run the race set before us. How many of you have ever been to a 5K? Half marathon, a marathon, a high school or middle school cross-country meet. This is not rhetorical. Raise your hands. Anyone? Anyone? I need to know. Okay. So some of you get what I'm going to say here. As the runners run, they get tired and weary, right? And the streets or the paths are most often lined with people. Many who the runners don't even know. And they're cheering them on as they run. And I got to witness this past year because my daughters, Alex and Berkeley, both ran cross country. One for high school and one for middle school. Why? I don't know. Don't. But they enjoyed it, I think. Maybe. Possibly. But friends and family and parents of children were there to encourage them as they ran. I got to watch my youngest daughter, Briley, and Alex run alongside their sister, Berkeley, for over a mile, listening to them saying, because in middle school you can run alongside the kids, listening to them say, "Come on, Berkeley, you can do it. You can do it. Don't give up. Keep pushing. You're almost there. Just a little longer. Fight through the pain. The finish line is just over the next hill. Come on, Berkeley, finish strong." It's what I picture when I read this text. Surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Saints. Those we know. Those we do not. Centuries of saints filling the clouds, cheering us on as we run the race set before us, saying, "You can do it. Don't give up. Fight through the pain. And then finish strong. Look, the finish line's right there." And then as we finish our race, great job. Welcome home. So what's your legacy of faith? What will you leave behind? I want to tell you about a man who has perhaps impacted my faith, possibly more than any other individual, at least as much as any other individual. It's not my father. It's not my grandfather. It's not a mentor, a fellow pastor, a professor. It's none of those. This man, I believe, is perhaps the most righteous man that I ever knew. And he died completely unaware that his Christ-like example will be lived out through me and through countless others, I'm sure. This man died about 20 years ago at the age of 60. He was a few years older than my father. My dad had known Glenn his entire life. Gone to church with Glenn his entire life. My father said that Glenn was the strongest man he ever knew. Even as a young boy, he could do the work of 3 men. He was a towering man. He looked to be 6'4", 6'5" to me, and really broad shoulders. Growing up, some of the other boys would tease Glenn because he was a bit different. But it didn't really bother him. He would just shrug it off with a smile or a chuckle. Because Glenn, he saw the best in everyone and overlooked their intended cruelty. Glenn was one of our church's ushers. He always took up the offering on the same side, the right side, the one nearest the wall. There were about 3 rows of 20 pews each. Glenn did it on that side because he felt safe. And he wouldn't get confused if he wasn't in the middle. Every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night, every special meeting, every revival, every church function, every fellowship dinner, Glenn was at our church. For the first 18 years of my life, I can't remember a Sunday or a Wednesday that I didn't see Glenn. He was always at the door. He would pass out bulletins or prayer list with his very, very shaky hands. He greeted everyone with a huge smile. And he would always say, me glad you're here. As a kid, I remember him giving us candy or gum. As a young man coming home from college, I remember his eyes lighting up as he would see me coming. At this point, Glenn would greet me with a hug and a bigger than normal smile, and he would say, "Me glad you're here, Chris." And he was. He was. To my knowledge, Glenn owned one suit. He wore it every Sunday. Glenn never owned a car. I don't think he ever drove a car. He never owned a home. Glenn never married. He lived with his parents until they died. And then he lived with his sister and her husband. Anytime prayer requests were taken, and I mean anytime, Glenn always requested prayer for his sister Mary and his brother-in-law. Because he said they weren't saved and they didn't come to church and they needed to know Jesus. Glenn's favorite song was "Child of the King." And he'd sing a solo, a cappella, at church about once a year. It was completely out of tune. And you could hardly make out all the words as he belted it out very proudly. As a child, I chuckled. As a teenager, I smiled. As an adult, thinking back, I cried tears of joy. It was the only song he knew all the words to. I'm not sure how he learned it because Glenn couldn't read. He never went to school. He never graduated high school. He never earned a college degree. Maybe you figured it out by now, but Glenn was what they called in those days mentally retarded. He had the mind of about a 7 or 8-year-old child. And his love was unconditional, just like a 7 or 8-year-old child. He's honestly the only man that I believe gave all of his talent in service to his King. His only reward was to share the love of Christ with everyone he met and to reflect the glory and righteousness of his King. There's a bronze plaque on the wall of my parents' church in Guest Central. His face is engraved upon it. And the inscription beneath it says, Glenn Stykes, child of the King. It's not there because Glenn left a bunch of money when he died. It's not there because he has a string of accomplishments and titles after his name. It's there because they wanted to honor Glenn and recognize the eternal and impactful legacy, a legacy of faith that this wonderful Christian man left behind. And I'm confident that Glenn was completely unaware of his witness, because that was not his intent at all. He served because he loved to serve. I have absolutely no doubt that when Glenn entered those pearly gates, he was greeted by his King with words, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You finished your race. You persevered. You gave it all. You did your absolute best to selflessly give the very few gifts that I gave you. You nobly fulfilled your purpose. Well done. Come on in. Let me show you to your new home. Yours is the big, huge mansion at the end of this big, long street. It's the biggest one on the street. Welcome home, son. Welcome home. A legacy of faith and righteousness. As we celebrate All Saints Sunday, I hope you wrestle with the question, what will I leave behind? Amen.